The bell has rung. So get seated and join Elementary Schooled for today's interview.
Welcome to Elementary Schooled. This is season 1, episode 12. And today we are talking about kids and absences and getting our kids to show up. And I want to welcome my special guest, Amy Steele-Smith. You are a Utah State Board of Education member and a prevention specialist. Thank you for accepting and being willing to share your talents and wisdom with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'll read a part of your bio because it's really long and really amazing. And my biggest takeaway was you probably never missed any school. You graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. You have a master's degree in social work and a master's degree in business. You are licensed in the areas of school social work and special education, and you are currently working towards your psychological autopsy certification, which we talked about a minute ago before we started. I was intrigued by that. You have spent 14 years in child welfare and 12 years in the public education system. Your last teaching assignment was in a high behavior needs special education classroom. You are a part of the Utah State Board of Education prevention team and the School Safety Center, where you work with board members, legislators, and local education agencies on policies regarding bullying, absenteeism, human trafficking, and sexual abuse prevention efforts. This doesn't include all of your experience and work, but wow, thank you for making a mark on the world. Do you have a favorite part of your job? I'm just curious, and I can edit any of this out.
It's very interesting to have been doing this for so long. But what is so much more exciting is to watch people take those tools that you provide for them and then create their own success with it. That is what's fulfilling and rewarding for sure.
I can understand that. Very satisfying to teach someone else how to fish instead of just doing fishing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's start with just some straight statistics. Will you tell us how it really is?
So in 2021, 19% of Utah's students were chronically absent, and that is 626,000 children in the state of Utah. And I like to give the actual number because 19% oftentimes doesn't necessarily correlate to anything for people. But when you hear the actual number of how many students that is, that's pretty impactful. Chronically absent means a student that's missed 10% or more of the school year, and that is excused or unexcused absences. So that I like to make sure that people understand that, because oftentimes people think that chronic absenteeism is just those unexcused absences. And another thing that I think is important for people to understand when they're looking at that number is, so chronic absenteeism, if they've only missed 10% or more of the school year, is 18 and a half days. And that is about a month of instruction. So if a student is only missing 10% or more for 9 of their school years, they've missed an entire year of school, which is significant. And because we know how much learning goes on in just a month's time. So it is important that we work on understanding those statistics a little bit better.
How do we compare our numbers with other states, just nationally?
So some of the final numbers aren't out yet, or have not been published yet, but I have gone on to like Colorado and Idaho's website, and Utah, we are trending pretty similarly to our neighboring states. And in those states in years 18, 19, 20, and 21, we really did follow similar trends. So there has been an uptick in absenteeism
So
since,
this was happening before COVID. When you said 2019, or do you mean that school year?
no, that's school year.
Okay.
So 18 and 19, you know, our rates of absenteeism were similar to Colorado and Idaho. And as our rates have increased since COVID, so have our neighboring states. So everyone's kind of seen this same roller coaster, I guess, or trajectory of what absenteeism has done before and then after COVID.
So since we're specifically talking about elementary school children today, I was curious about this. I read a recent news article, it was a few weeks ago, about kindergarten being the most absent, at least here in Utah. Is that correct?
That is, yeah.
And do we know why?
Yeah, there are some things that we can look at that may be affecting that, but kindergartners are chronically absent at the rate of 21.6%. And we believe that there is some correlation between full day kindergarten and part day kindergarten. That's one thing that because we haven't had statewide full day kindergarten, we haven't been able to really assess those numbers and those statistics. But we do know that children who are in kindergarten for part of the day, we have a lot of working families where both parents work, or they have one parent who's working multiple jobs, and it's difficult for them to take their child to school and then 2 hours later disrupt their work schedule again and go pick their child up. And we also have seen some correlation that we have older students that may be absent because they're assisting in childcare or helping their kindergarten sibling get to and from school.
Can full day kindergarten be part of the solution, in your opinion?
Like I said, this school year, this one that we're in now is the first year that we've had where we had the implementation, and it wasn't full funding for the entire state. There was partial funding for an increased number of schools to have full day kindergarten, and we saw really great success with that.
Okay.
We know that in these LEAs, their full day kindergartens, there are waiting lists to be able to get students into full day kindergarten. One reason that we believe full day kindergarten helps to reduce chronic absenteeism is like I said before, it really helps with accessibility for those working parents. And it really allows for the child to get kind of past that anxious part of being dropped off and get into the engagement part of the learning when they're there for a longer period of time. Another advantage to full day kindergarten is that students will have easy access to after school club programs. Lots of those morning kindergarten kids don't have access to that unless they have a parent who can bring them back to the after school club program that in a smaller group setting allows for them to build connections, positive connections in the school setting.
How does a school get priority for this? Is it based on the data and what numbers you're seeing in specific districts or areas where the state can offer the full day kindergarten to those areas or schools? Or how does that process happen?
Is talk right now on the Hill about expanding that
Okay.
to full funding of it, but I'd have to look into that a little bit more.
No problem. Let's talk about the why, and let's go back a little bit. The climax of this problem was obviously during COVID. And I just remember talking to our secretary one time, and I said, this is really hard to get back on track because it was almost just a different end of the spectrum. Like kids that didn't ever want to miss a day of school, and now they don't want to go to school. And she said, oh yes, school became optional for many kids, just the mindset during COVID, that was a mindset change. And so is that part of what we're trying to get back on track with? Do you think it's a mindset?
Well, it could be, or it could be a habit. It's very easy to break habits and to fall back into new habits that we feel like are just as good. And if they meet some other needs that we may be having, sometimes those habits are easier to form. You joked about my attendance, but it's funny because the first day of school that I sloughed was my first day of kindergarten. But it's a story that I often tell in some of my trainings because it really lends back or goes back to building relationships. I didn't ever miss another day of kindergarten, but I think it's because my teacher, when me and my little friend came back to school, she must have just welcomed us and didn't shame us for having made the decision that we made. And that was still our class and we were still welcome there. And I had a wonderful experience in that elementary school and loved it dearly and loved those teachers dearly. So I do like to always, kind of tell that story because I wasn't, perfect in school, but educators made attending school important and enjoyable and safe for me. So there really are a number of reasons that kids could be missing school. I think it's important that we look at cases of chronic absenteeism, both at a macro and a micro level.
And why are they missing school when it comes to chronic?
Right. And LEAs, I really feel like need to, they each have individual cultures, but do they have a culture of attendance? So are we first looking at that macro level and deciding, is our school welcoming? Do we have high expectations while providing good supports? Are we implementing positive behavior interventions and supports? Do students feel like they belong in our school and our school community? And then there will be situations that we need to look at more individual to assist families in problem solving around attendance. But if we don't have that macro level of culture of attendance, then we are doing what I would say is tier 3 supports for an entire student body, which we can't do. We need to be able to put those tier 1 supports in place and then really drill down with some of those more micro level things that need to be happening.
And just so our listeners know that might not understand that wording, when we say tier 1, we mean the whole. So for any classroom, tier 1 would be my whole classroom. But if I did a tier 2, that would be a small group. And then tier 3 is individualized work or attention to whatever the issue is. What would you say to parents who are having a hard time getting their kids to school? And is that part of the issue with work schedules and other things that you've mentioned so far?
Yeah, I always like to first remind people that we know our parents love their children and want the very best for them. I think sometimes, and I did this too, we're just doing the very best, right, with the resources and the knowledge that we have available. And I know as educators, we sometimes may think that we care about our students coming to school more than anybody else. But I know as a parent, that's really just not the case. That's a false belief.
Sure.
Which really lends to the need for parents and educators to find ways to partner on building good attendance habits in children. We need to not just educate our communities about the importance of attendance, but parents need to help educate their children on the why good attendance is important. If we don't see the value in attending and showing up, it's difficult for young students to make that connection on their own. I'll just self-report here. There were times when my kids were growing up and going to school that I don't think I truly grasped the importance of attendance, because I made them do their schoolwork when we came back, and we took homework with us and all of those things. But as I got into the world of education, I thought, oh, Amy, darn it, you shouldn't have taken them out of school so many times. And so I think just as a parent, we have to help build, like I said, that culture or that expectation or understanding of why attendance is important.
Hey, listen, yeah, I feel you too. After raising kids, part of the reason I went back to teaching is 'cause I thought I would be a much better teacher after having, raised kids
Absolutely.
of my own, because you do have a sense of just reality. Even with a really hardworking, responsible child, the habits can change. That's what I learned so quickly with COVID. Wow, the habits now are just different. And there was a lot of online, but then one of my daughters, who's a very good student, just said, I would rather just work way ahead and go online. I don't really want to be in school now. I want to talk about kids being sick and mental health days, because it is tricky for us as parents when we have a child saying, I'm not feeling good. And how do we sometimes evaluate that? And as a parent, you can feel like, oh, I need to toughen up on this, and then and then as soon as you do, then that's when the school calls you and says your child just threw up, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like Murphy's Law, but what do we do with that, with sick and mental health days?
Yeah, I agree. That is tricky, and it's become more tricky since COVID because we are more careful. And we know that we have seen a higher propensity of students with anxiety prior to the COVID pandemic. So we do need to be sensitive to that. I would say that we want kids to feel safe, and safety doesn't just mean physical safety. We need to appreciate that a child needs to feel psychologically safe. And part of this feeling of safety, children gauge based upon how the adults are telling them, either by body language or, interactions when they're always listening, but telling them that they should be reacting. Taking opportunities to do this individually with your child. Sometimes they don't want to have some of these conversations in the car with, you know, brother and sister or dad or whoever else in the car. They need to be able to have opportunities to build these relationships and these times of trust individually, and that will provide parents with opportunities to really help them understand how their children react to different situations and determine if what their child is experiencing is illness or if it's something else.
I will say that from an elementary school angle, it is really nice. And we have parents that are able to approach us and tell us what's really happening. For example, during the COVID time, I had a parent say, she really is struggling with anxiety now. And we didn't have this issue before. And just knowing that, I could keep an extra eye on her or make an extra effort to give her a side hug in the morning, or ask her how she was doing, or just tell her that I was so glad that she was at school. And just those little ways of telling our students that they're missed really are important, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And what you are describing there is exactly what we're talking about with that educator parent or school parent partnership, right? Because there are things that happen at home and conversations that happen at home that really can help us in school when we're working with students to be able to not cause more trauma or not talk about something that a student isn't ready to talk about, or create
Sure.
a feeling of understanding. So yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that kids really want to be in places where they feel like they belong, just like all of us. And it's not just calling home or saying when they got back, we missed you, but it's, why did you miss me? Well, is there something about me you missed, or do you just say that to every kid, that walks
Exactly.
through the door that wasn't there? So it's really not just for parents, but us too, about building those individual trusting relationships with kids.
Thank you for that. Well, we've already kind of talked about this, but just asking, how can teachers help? When I was young, and you might have experienced this too, the teacher really did call your house and say to a parent, I missed Melanie today, and it made you feel so good. And so, I like that added piece of adding what you missed about the child and making a sincere and genuine connection with that child. I'd like to invite every family, because I just did this and looked at the absences of my child that's in
Mhm.
school, and it can be actually quite shocking. Like, did we really miss that many days? And I'm talking about a good student here. Along with that, what would you say about vacations?
Oh, that's tricky. Vacations are hard, and vacations and building those relationships and families are important. And
I agree.
that's why I say we really need to understand kind of what may be a bigger cultural issue versus what may be an individual issue. If you have a student who is chronically absent and you're having conversations and you're interacting and you find that, well, that student was chronically absent because they missed 1 week altogether at the same time. That's a very different conversation than a chronically absent student who is missing every Tuesday and Thursday
Sure.
of the school year. So I think really understanding why a student may be missing. But I again would say that as parents, we probably should have a conversation with our kids around that. We're choosing, right? We're choosing to do this activity because it's important for our family. But as we're choosing to do that, we understand that there may be consequences to that. And those consequences may be that we have more homework, or we, have to take 30 minutes every day during the vacation to be able to read, or some other things. So I think really appreciating that children they're watching. So if we just miss school because we're going to play and have fun, and there's no conversation around the process or the thought process around the parent's decision to do that, then they're not really able to make that connection on their own that, oh, but there's still things, even though we're missing, that we still have to attend to.
We can tell when families, when they do the work while they're gone, and we don't want that to be your whole vacation, but I think you make a valid point in setting a small time aside that we're going to read together, or let's get out that assignment while we're on the airplane or in the car ride, and let's have that the message to the child is, this is a priority too. I get to go on the vacation, but this work is also a priority, and to follow through. And it's just to create that accountability and responsibility at young ages.
Yeah, absolutely. Parents are one of the first teachers of protective factors. And it really is a great opportunity to build those things like self-advocacy, right? A student can go in and talk to their teacher beforehand themselves and prepping them on how to do that to get homework. Or, building resiliency, because it may not be as fun to do it this way, but this is the way that we need to do it. So it really is a great opportunity to build some of those protective factors, and that really help with skills in settings across a whole host of settings for our kids.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Is there a basic state standard to guide school districts and their policies? I know I looked into ours and I was really quite pleased with what I saw that our district has on its site for resources. Do districts really vary in their policies, or do they pretty much have the same standard?
So there are 6 statutes that kind of oversee and govern compulsory education, absenteeism, truancy. There's 3 of them that I think are probably the most relevant. Um, it's and I'll give you the numbers. I geek out on this stuff. I love policy and rules and statutes, but it's a little dry for some. So there's 53G 6202, and that's the compulsory education statute. And so that's where it talks about issuing notice to parents of students that are in grades 1 through 6 if they have been missing school. Then the truancy statutes 56G 6203, And that then affects those grades 7 and above, because at that point it kind of shifts the responsibility from the parent getting the child to school to the child is responsible. If they left school, that was their choice to do that. So that kind of oversees those grades 7 and above. And then 53G 6206, and that is the duties to resolve attendance problems. And so that's where oftentimes people say to me, our hands are tied, we can't do anything. There's, all the laws were taken away with House Bill 239, and that's really not the case. What 206 and what occurred was that schools now just need to show that they go through a process, that they provide some individualized services for a student before they referring them to more punitive measures like the court system. So, have they engaged in interventions that are individualized and specifically meet the underlying needs of why the student may be missing school? So, and then the last one is the rule. So at the legislature, at the Utah state level, we have the statutes, and those statutes then govern administrative rules that are set by the Utah State Board of Education. And the absenteeism and truancy rule is R277607. And that one does go through and identify specific things that need to be in policies regarding absenteeism and truancy. And compulsory education, and setting like incentives and how to promote regular and punctual student attendance.
Thank you for that. Can I just respond to a couple of those, since I am a school teacher?
Yeah.
One is, and I've seen this before, I've worked in different districts and was out of state for a time as well. And anytime I would hear that, if they get to that point of having if a child has too many absences, to go ahead and copy the letter that you can get, teacher access to from the school district, a policy letter sharing concern about your child's absence, and to send that letter home. And I always had difficulty with that because, and I think most teachers probably feel this way, where you're really trying to connect, and especially now, like that might have worked, 15 years ago, but to just send a letter home, I never want to do that, because I don't want to make families feel like, oh, this is a business, and and also it's a judgment-free zone, and I believe we really have to have that mindset that I'm not judging, I just really want your child here, and I want to help. And so when it comes to the notice, I think that we need to create a notification, but that how we do that and what our approach is really important to building a relationship and connection with the family. And so there's been times where I've just asked a parent, like, hey, do you need some help? I noticed that your child's missing school, and is there a sickness or what's going on? And usually, yeah, there's something going on, or divorce, something that's really kind of shaken the family up, and they need a minute. And so it's just nice to, I think, for the parent to hear that you care, and it's nice for us to know what's really going on. So thanks for mentioning that we need to notify. And then the incentive part of it, that we can give an incentive. And I will say this because I just did this with my class, because we are doing fractions right now. And so it wasn't throwing them a party. I just said, let's keep track of absences. How many students do we have in our class? Okay, 27. And today we have 24. The next day we had 25. Then, and we were just keeping, we were doing our own data together as a class. And just by talking about that and putting the fraction on the board, that was an incentive to them for everyone to be at school, because they wanted to get the whole. We were talking about, we need 27 out of 27. As a parent, if I got a letter, I would feel shamed or guilty or all of the above. And some of those things can be good sometimes, but how do you respond to that?
Well,
'Cause parents too, we feel bad.
we do feel bad. Yeah, parents have feelings too. But it kind of, when you bring up shame, it reminds me of restorative practices. So I do some restorative practices training throughout the state. And one of the things it talks about there is ostracizing or reintegrative shame. And shame isn't, you're right, shame isn't necessarily bad. And we can't, if you read affect psychology, we're never going to avoid having shame experiences. But what the difference is what kind of shame is it? I'm sure when I showed back up to kindergarten, after my friend's mom had picked us up on the road walking to my friend's house to go play, I'm sure that there was some conversation that occurred. But like I said, in the fact that I was willing to stay and that didn't ever occur again, and felt like that was my class, I'm sure the shame that was delivered was what we call reintegrative shame, which is the behavior was not okay, but you as a person, you are okay. And really being able to separate how we deliver that. But I cannot stress enough, and I talk about this regularly, we have to not just invite our parents to be part of the conversation, but we have to engage them in the work of educating their kids. And those are two different things. We can invite them and have them show up at the door, but engaging them is a completely different experience, because it's when we have that engagement with parents that we probably we're less likely to be blindsided by a student not attending or having something that we have to work through, because we've had conversations with the trusted adult that cares for them. So building that engaging relationship can help buffer that. And then also when they receive feedback from you as an educator, they already know you. They know you as a person. They have a relationship with you, and it's a conversation. It's not I gotcha, or why aren't you doing this correctly? It's we're in this together and educating your child, and we both want what's best.
Thank you. I know I did have a parent one year that I was so impressed. It honestly was an anxiety problem or issue. It's not anxiety's everywhere, so I don't want to use the word problem. I want to use the word as issue. We all have to work through anxiety, but she did get, even for a young child, I was teaching second grade at the time, and involved a professional to help. And I just remember that every week this student had a different goal. And one of the goals was, well, mom's going to walk you to the front of the school. Oh, not ready for that goal yet. Okay, mom's going to walk you to the classroom. And that was where the drop off was. And then the next week is mom walks you to the hall. And then, okay, now we're ready for the goal of mom walks you to the front of the school. And then pretty soon, mom was just doing pickup, like a normal drop off and pick up, where she was part of the carpool with everyone else. And so there is progression in some of those challenges that kids really do have these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what you touched on that is very important is it's progression at where they are. It's not progression where we want them to be. That's part of what we learn when we're trying to create those safe environments for kids. We know with Maslow's, hierarchy of need, that there's some things that have to be met first before that self-actualization can occur. And if we rush children through those experiences, they don't have the time to fully appreciate or feel safe with that step or stage that they're in. So I really like that, there is progression, but we have to be okay with the progression that's appropriate for the student. And I say that in not meaning we don't have high expectations, because we also always hold high expectations for our kids. We want for them to know that we think that they can be successful and know they can be successful. these things, and providing those high expectations is how we do that, but providing the right supports for those expectations that we have.
That's excellent points and advice. You talked about restorative practices. Are there any others that you would want to mention?
One of the other trainings that we do that's really great is Safe and Civil Schools does the functional behavioral assessment of absenteeism and truancy. And that's a great training that we provide to LEAs for free. We have a contract with them for 3 more years, I believe it is, but that's a really great training. And it's really relationship based. It's talking about building those relationships and understanding what the underlying causes or underlying needs are. I think probably the only other thing I would like to mention is I do like to encourage people to remember that schools don't operate in a vacuum. They operate in communities, and we need to look at the issues our schools are facing with that perspective. It's great when we have a culture in our family, of attending. It's great when we have a culture in our family and our school of attending, but it's really best if the culture is within our community.
Do we know yet if we've made progress since that statistic of 19% of our students not showing up every day? Or is this something that we won't know until, like, how often is it evaluated?
It's evaluated yearly, and that report, it will be out soon by the end of the month. So everybody also does have access to the data and statistics for the Utah school system on USBE's website. If they go to data and statistics, those numbers are posted there.
Okay, I will put that link in the show notes. So thank you for that. I do like to sum up with a bit of a spiritual or Christian thought, and this isn't scripture, but it should be. But it's Brene Brown. I'm a big fan. I think many people are. But I love this quote. She says, "Sometimes the bravest and most important thing we can do is just show up." And I've thought about that with absenteeism, because there was a time in our family's lives where it was really hard to show up. And I remember thinking, what I do in this situation is going to be really important because my kids are watching me. Part of being brave is showing up. And I know there were days I've been honest with my students before, like today, it was kind of hard for me to be here because I have some things going on personally. And I think we give a little bit of honesty, and age appropriate, not overdoing it. But if we give a little bit of honesty, I think it's good for children to hear that sometimes it's hard for us too as adults, but that we are conquering and trying to be brave and courageous and do what we need to do to be present.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. I have heard that before. I also really like Brene Brown. But I completely agree. And I love that you also talked about having the conversations with kids. Our kids, they know more than we think. And
They
so
do.
if
They're always watching.
They are always watching. And I think that if we have better conversations with them, we don't need to have less, we just need to have better conversations with them, and help them learn how to navigate the situations that they are experiencing, so that when we're not there, they have that intrinsic ability to do it.
Well, I'm looking at how you have a couple of master's degrees and continue education. So you are the perfect one for us to talk to today, and that you value school and education, and that it leads to beautiful places, because look at all of the help that you are offering to our communities, our state, our Utah State Board of Education, all of your wisdom and professionalism. So I want to thank you. Thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom and talents today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Melanie.
Thanks for being part of today's class. To submit a question or topic for further episodes, please email elementary.schooled@outlook.com. School is out for today, but please remember, when we strengthen a child, we strengthen society.